The shuttle's landing gear groaned against the surface of Virex 12, a planet known for its jagged obsidian cliffs and dense clouds of bioluminescent spores. The docking bay shimmered under a dome of translucent shielding, and as the hatch opened, a wave of humid, oddly sweet air rushed in. Jackson Stratton stepped off the ramp, boots crunching on the polished composite floor. He adjusted his gear pack and scanned the bay. A group of alien students stood in a loose semicircle near the far entrance, their robes marked with the gold insignia of the Interstellar Biology Exchange. Most were taking notes on slim, glowing tablets, occasionally glancing at him with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. A taller alien, gray-skinned with a tapering head and deep violet eyes, detached from the group and approached. "You are the human?" it asked in a clipped mechanical translation. "That's right," Jackson said, pulling off his helmet. His hair was damp with sweat. "Jackson Stratton, Earth-based xenobiologist. You should not have come," the alien replied. "No one survives the cave." Jackson raised an eyebrow. "Which cave?" The alien turned, gesturing toward the horizon where jagged peaks rose like broken teeth. "The Virexian Hollow. It emits toxic gases. All attempts to study it end in death. Even our equipment fails. It corrupts recordings, disables drones. You will achieve nothing." "Well, that's kind of the point," Jackson said, hitching his pack higher. "To find out why," the alien tilted its head. "You are aware of the fatalities, I read the reports. But there's something in those caves that's throwing off your sensors. That doesn't just happen. It's not just toxicity. Something's alive down there." "Alive? No, just death," Jackson shrugged. "Guess I'll find out." The alien didn't reply. It turned and walked back to the group, murmurs in their own language following Jackson as he made his way to the research wing. Inside, the lab was clean and cold. Alien technology hummed on the walls, but Jackson ignored most of it, laying out his own gear on a stainless table. He had brought his own oxygen filtration system, carbon sensors, and enough spore traps to cover half a forest. The plan was straightforward. Enter the cave, collect air and biological samples, and get out before the exposure time became lethal. A short alien, only waist-high, waddled in holding a datapad. Its skin was flecked green and orange like rusted copper. "You are going alone. Seems like no one's lining up to join me." "It is. Bold or foolish?" Jackson zipped his pack. "I'll take my chances." The alien blinked slowly. "We will monitor your vitals until we can't." He left early the next morning. The sun on Virex 12 was barely more than a dull red smear through the thick atmosphere. The wind howled between the rocks, carrying spores that glowed faintly in the dark. Jackson trudged toward the cave mouth, checking the seals on his suit. The cave stood like a wound in the rock, its interior pitch black. Around the entrance, the ground had a scorched look, as though fire had licked the stone and left it blackened. He activated his oxygen and stepped inside. Within 50 feet, the air thickened. The suit's filters whirred louder as the levels of unknown toxins spiked. His visor displayed chemical signatures that didn't match any known atmospheric compounds. As he moved deeper, the walls began to pulse faintly, as though emitting a weak fluorescence. He set down a spore trap and released the first drone. Nothing. The drone's feed went dead 2 meters ahead. Jackson stared at the static, then at the drone, which floated motionless in the air. "Well, that's comforting," he muttered. He moved forward carefully. His boots crunched over crystalline dust. There were no signs of life, but he felt watched. The further in he went, the more disoriented he became. His internal compass spun erratically. He marked his path with chalk, but the marks seemed to fade within minutes, and then he saw them, fungi. Not just any mushrooms, these were tall, almost waist-high, with translucent caps and veined stalks that twitched faintly in response to his light. He knelt beside one, scanning it. The readings were bizarre. It emitted a faint bioelectric field and had a spore density beyond anything he'd seen. He collected samples quickly, placing them in sealed containers. His breath caught. The air inside his suit had changed. The filters weren't keeping up. His vision blurred. Alarms flashed across his visor. The toxin was penetrating through the filtration. He turned. The cave was shifting. The walls pulsed and the floor felt soft. His legs buckled and he hit the ground hard, gasping. Pain shot up his right side. His arm wouldn't move properly. He tried to rise, but the dizziness crushed him down. His last conscious act was activating the emergency beacon. When he woke, it was to pain. His ribs screamed with every breath. The ceiling above him was white, sterile, and the air smelled like disinfectant. "You are alive." The voice was flat, but unmistakably surprised. Jackson turned his head. The gray-skinned alien from before stood beside the bed. "How long?" Jackson rasped. 3 days. We found you just inside the cave mouth. You had collapsed. My arm fractured. The medics applied a splint. You must recover before returning home." Jackson closed his eyes. "The mushrooms, did you analyze them?" "Yes." "They are unlike any known species. They contain enzymes that neutralize the cave's toxins. You found an antidote." He let out a long breath. "So it's biological. The cave isn't just toxic, it's alive." The alien's eyes flickered. "We did not consider that." Jackson turned his head to the side, wincing. "I need to test the enzymes. There's a pattern in the way the mushrooms grow. They're not random. It's like they're trying to protect something. You are injured. You should wait." "No time." "The longer we wait, the more we risk corruption of the samples." The alien hesitated. "We will bring your equipment." Over the next week, Jackson worked from the medical bay. His ribs were taped, his arm immobilized, but he managed to extract the enzymes. What he found made his pulse quicken. The compounds weren't just neutralizing toxins, they were actively repairing cellular damage. When applied to simple cell cultures, they reversed deterioration caused by the cave's atmosphere. He reported his findings to the research council. The room was filled with skeptical alien students and staff, but as he presented slide after slide of results, the room grew quiet. "You are saying," one of the students said slowly, "that a species of fungi has evolved to counteract the cave's toxicity, which we believed was universally lethal." "Yes, and not just that. These mushrooms seem to be part of a larger ecosystem. The cave isn't just dangerous, it's self-regulating. The toxicity is a defense mechanism." "To protect what?" Jackson paused. "I don't know yet. But I intend to find out." The council deliberated. In the end, they granted him permission for a second expedition once he had recovered. A month later, his ribs still sore but healed, Jackson stood once more at the cave entrance. This time, he wore a modified suit lined with the compound derived from the mushrooms. It wasn't perfect, but it bought him time. He moved deeper than before. The air still shimmered with toxins, but his suit held. The mushrooms became denser, forming almost a path. He followed it. Hours passed. The tunnel widened into a chamber, and there at the center, something pulsed. A massive fungal growth towering with veins running from floor to ceiling. It thrummed with life. He approached slowly, scanning. The readings were off the charts, but not hostile. The spores it released were filtered by his suit, and he felt no ill effects. He reached out and touched it. Nothing happened. But as he turned to leave, he saw it, carved into the rock symbols. Not alien, not human, but deliberate. Patterns. Geometry not found in nature. Someone had been here before and left a warning. Jackson backed away, heart pounding. There was more here than toxins and mushrooms. The cave was ancient, and it remembered. He exited hours later, exhausted but alive. The council met him at the research wing. "You went further than any before," the gray alien said. "There's something under that cave," Jackson said. "The toxins, the mushrooms, they're just the surface. Someone built that place, or something." The council exchanged glances. "You will return." He looked at the samples in his hand, the antidote that could change how they explored hostile environments. "I will. But next time, I'm not going alone." The lab's overhead lights buzzed faintly, casting a sterile sheen across the rows of containment trays. Jackson sat hunched at a long counter, one arm still bound in a rigid brace while his left hand manipulated a thin probe under a magnifier. The fungal tissue glistened under the lens, its translucent membrane twitching with residual bioactivity. An audible cough interrupted his concentration. "You are still working on the primary culture?" asked the copper-flecked alien, who had introduced itself only once as Vel and never said the name again. Jackson didn't look up. "It's growing faster than expected. I split the sample yesterday. Each half's developing a different structure." Vel edged closer, peering at the tray with the dispassionate interest of someone observing an animal caught in a trap. You believe it's responding to stimuli. No, I know it is. I played a low-frequency tone across one tray. The growth shifted toward the sound within 3 hours. The other tray was exposed to a weak UV pulse. It flattened out like it was trying to hide. Vel made a low click in its throat. You assume intelligence from response. That is not science. It is guessing with arrogance. Jackson leaned back, adjusting the brace that tugged at his shoulder. And you're assuming the cave's just a gas chamber with fancy mold. No one's mapped its full depth. You've lost how many probes? 14, Vel said quickly. And 5 teams. We do not throw lives at mystery without caution. Funny. You've got a whole university built on a planet you barely understand, but sure, I'm the reckless one. Vel's eyes narrowed, but it didn't reply. Instead, it tapped its datapad and held it toward Jackson. Your second mission is postponed. Jackson straightened. Postponed based on what? There are anomalies in your blood analysis. Your white cell count is elevated beyond tolerance. Your cognitive scan showed irregular spiking in the auditory cortex. There is concern you are experiencing residual effects. That's the cave, not me. I was breathing engineered air. If something crossed the barrier, it wasn't random. Either way, Vel said, you are grounded until reviewed by the Oversight Committee. Jackson pushed the tray back with his good hand, glancing at the fungal sample as it twitched again. You realize it's learning, right? This isn't some ambient reaction. It's adapting, and we're wasting time. Vel turned to leave. Time is safer than haste. Later that evening, Jackson lay on his bunk staring at the ceiling. The medical patch around his ribs itched, but he resisted scratching. He could feel the stiffness returning in his right shoulder. The medics had warned him that pushing too hard would delay healing, but they hadn't said anything about the headaches. They pulsed behind his eyes now, dull and rhythmic, not sharp enough to panic, but steady enough to notice. He sat up when the door opened. A new figure entered, taller than Vel, with pale turquoise skin and a narrow jawline. No insignia on the robe. I heard about the delay, the alien said, voice smoother than the others. Jackson nodded. You one of the Oversight Committee members? No. I'm Relin. I teach environmental neurobiology. My students have been tracking your data transmissions. Jackson rubbed the back of his neck. Didn't realize I had a fan club. They think you're reckless. I think you're incomplete. Jackson raised an eyebrow. Come again. You're looking at the mushrooms like they're the answer. They're not. They're a symptom. He leaned forward. What do you mean? Do you know how long the cave has been classified as bio-hostile? Jackson shook his head. Over 300 Virexian cycles. That's roughly 800 Earth years. We've had outposts here since the second expansion phase, and no one's ever managed to explain the cave's toxicity. It doesn't behave like a natural phenomenon. It fluctuates with no pattern. It reacts to presence. Jackson's pulse quickened. So you think it's artificial? I think it's deliberate, and I think the mushrooms are a containment system, not a cure. Jackson stood, wincing at the pull in his side. Why are you telling me this? Relin's expression didn't change, because your scan showed something else. Your brainwave activity, part of it matches a resonance we picked up inside the cave over a decade ago. But that signal was never supposed to be receivable by organic systems. You think the cave talked to me. I think you're the first one who stayed inside long enough to listen. The next day, Jackson ignored the grounding order. He left before sunrise, slipping past the outer perimeter using one of the older XO rovers the students used for terrain mapping. It wasn't fast, but it was quiet. He modified the suit again, this time incorporating a micro-resonator tuned to the frequency Relin had shown him. If the cave was emitting something, he wanted to hear it. By mid-morning, he was descending once more into the opening. This time, the air remained stable longer. The suit's internal display showed a drop in toxicity, still lethal, but slower acting. The mushrooms were still there, denser now, forming a rough corridor deeper into the rock. He followed it. After nearly 2 hours, the path widened into a new chamber. The air shimmered faintly, and a low hum vibrated through his boots. The resonator on his chest blinked green. He turned the audio feed on. It wasn't noise. It was a pattern, not language in any recognizable form, but pulses, regular and layered like overlapping rhythms. He stepped closer to the chamber's center. Suddenly, the ground shifted beneath him, not a quake, something more subtle, like a breath. Then a noise, clear this time, from the left wall. He turned, flashlight beam catching a surface that hadn't been visible before, smooth, metallic, and covered in hexagonal indentations. He moved closer, reaching out. The wall wasn't cold. It felt warm under his glove. His comm crackled. Jackson Stratton, respond immediately. Vel, he hadn't expected the rover's tracking beacon to be active. I'm inside the lower chamber, he said. There's a structure down here, it's not stone. You are in violation, save it, Jackson interrupted. Get Relin. Tell him I found a signal source. He cut the comm and focused back on the wall. The indentations were shallow, spaced evenly, and as he ran his fingers across them, one of them lit up faintly, then another. The hum deepened, and the mushrooms around the chamber began to contract. Jackson stepped back from the wall. A beam of light shot out, thin, almost invisible. It stopped a meter in front of him, forming a shape. A cube. Hovering inside it, images flickered. Shapes, worlds, systems he didn't recognize, and then Earth. His breath caught. The image was old. Earth as seen from orbit, with a satellite array that had been decommissioned centuries ago. The cube pulsed once and vanished. He stared at the space it had occupied, heart pounding. Then the comm buzzed again. We're en route. Do not move. It was Relin this time. Jackson sat down on the chamber floor, ignoring the pain in his ribs. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He just waited, eyes fixed on the place where Earth had appeared inside a cave that shouldn't know it existed. The recovery lab smelled faintly of citrus and antiseptic, a combination that made Jackson's stomach churn every time he blinked awake. His arm was immobilized again, this time by a gel brace that hardened around the joint like a second skin. The medics had insisted on a full decontamination, though his blood work had come back stable. They'd even double-checked the readings against samples from the first dive. No anomalies, no toxins, no signs of long-term neural damage. He didn't feel lucky. He felt like someone had run a magnet through his memories. Relin stood by the edge of the diagnostic table, hands clasped behind his back. His posture was too stiff for someone who'd been waiting there for more than an hour. You saw it, Relin said quietly. Yeah, Jackson replied, voice dry. I saw where it came from. Describe it again. You think I'm improvising? I think you're trying to make logical sense of something that wasn't meant to be understood, Jackson sighed. It wasn't a hallucination. I didn't imagine a projection of Earth orbiting with a satellite array that hasn't existed in over 500 years. I didn't imagine the cube, or the way it stabilized electromagnetic fields in the chamber. I didn't imagine the fact that the fungi retracted when the projection activated. Vel stepped into the room without knocking. He looked more annoyed than usual, which was saying something. Council reconvened. They want a full transcript of your neural data. They've authorized a deep memory scan. No, Jackson said immediately. You're not poking around in my hippocampus just because you're afraid of what I saw. It isn't fear, Vel said flatly. It's protocol. You triggered a response in a structure we didn't know existed. That makes you a variable. Jackson sat up straighter, grimacing as his ribs protested. You've had this cave on your doorstep for centuries. You've sent drones, probes, teams, all of them failed. I walk in, nearly die, and come out with samples that reverse the toxic effects. Then I find a projection system buried under the rock, and your response is to treat me like a lab rat. You are not a rat, Vel said. You are a contaminant. Relin stepped between them. He's also the only one who's made it back twice. That counts for something. Luck is not a method, Vel said, turning to leave. If he refuses the scan, the Oversight Committee will suspend all further biological access. No more samples, no more cave. The door shut behind him. Jackson leaned back, exhaling slowly. He ever relax? No, Relin said. He tried once. His throat clicked for 3 hours. Jackson chuckled despite the pain. I have a theory, Relin said, pacing now. The projection system, it wasn't meant to be found casually. The mushrooms are a fail-safe. They regulate exposure. That cube wasn't just a map. It was a verification trigger. You touched it, and it showed you something familiar. Then why Earth? Because you were born there. The system used your memory to display a pattern it assumed you'd recognize. It's not showing history. It's confirming identity. Jackson narrowed his eyes. So it's not a warning. No, it's a handshake. Later that night, Jackson sat alone in the observation dome. The view stretched across the obsidian ridgelines, the stars above smudged through the haze of Virex's atmosphere. He cradled a warm infusion pouch in both hands. The gel brace made drinking awkward, but he'd found a way to balance it against the table. The medics had cleared him for light mobility. No field work, no exposure to unknown elements, definitely no caves. He tapped the console beside him and pulled up the scan logs from the first dive. The chemical breakdown of the mushroom enzymes was still incomplete, but one pattern stood out, an amino sequence that didn't match any known life form in the catalog. It repeated across all samples, regardless of location, a repeating strand like a signature. He leaned forward. "Relin, you still awake?" the comm crackled. "Unfortunately, I've got something, that sequence we couldn't identify. I think it's embedded in the projection code." Silence for a moment. Then, "How would you know?" I ran a cross-check. The scanner logged faint pulses just before the cube appeared, subsonic vibrations. When I compared them to the enzyme structure, I got a partial match. "You're saying the mushrooms are broadcasting." "No, I'm saying they're responding to a signal. The projection system emits it, the fungi align to it. It's an internal feedback loop." There was a long pause. "That would mean," Relin said, "the cave's ecosystem was engineered." Exactly. 3 days passed. The council reviewed his findings with polite skepticism. Several alien researchers submitted rebuttals, claiming the sequences were coincidental, naturally emergent. Others argued that Jackson's human physiology could have interfered with the readings. Jackson let them argue. He had a different plan. He requested a controlled test chamber sealed, monitored, and sterilized. They gave him a compartment in the lower wing, just large enough for a table and 2 airlock doors. He brought in a single spore pod, carefully extracted from the sample vault, and set it in the center of the room. Then he played the signal. At first, nothing. Then the pod shuddered, split open, and began to grow slowly, deliberately toward the speaker emitting the pulse. The mushroom that emerged was shaped differently than the others, more symmetrical. Its cap shimmered faintly, and after 12 minutes it released a spore cloud that hovered in suspension, trailing patterns in the air that resembled the same hexagonal layout from the cave wall. Relin watched from behind the glass. "That's not a coincidence." "No," Jackson said. "It's communication." The council reconvened. This time they were quiet. Vel stood at the head of the table, flanked by 3 senior researchers. "We have reviewed the data. The projection system appears to respond to specific neurological frequencies. The fungi are not random growths. They are receptors." Jackson didn't speak. "You are hereby granted supervised access to the chamber," Vel continued. "One final entry. If you trigger another projection, we will attempt to record it using external sensors." Relin leaned in. "That's the best you're going to get." 2 days later, Jackson stood once more at the cave mouth. His brace had been upgraded lighter, with internal pressure regulators that kept the fracture stable. The new suit was custom-built with layered filtration, internal cooling, and an embedded resonator calibrated to the exact frequency of the initial pulse. He stepped inside. The path was the same, but the air felt different, less hostile, more balanced. He moved slowly, careful not to disturb the fungal growths lining the corridor. They twitched as he passed but didn't retract. At the chamber, he activated the resonator. The hum began, deeper this time, layered with harmonics he hadn't heard before. The wall lit up. The cube appeared again. But this time, it didn't show Earth. It showed the cave. Not as it was now, but as it had been once, smooth, clean, filled with light. Beings moved through it, tall and indistinct, their bodies blurred by the projection. They worked in harmony with the mushrooms, guiding their growth, shaping the environment. Then the image shifted, a breach, a collapse. The projection flickered, and for a moment Jackson saw a face not human, not alien, something else, watching him. Then the cube dissolved. He stood in the silence, heart racing. The suit's sensors pinged. No toxins, no radiation, no anomalies. He turned and walked out of the cave. The council waited at the research wing. Jackson told them everything. They listened. When he finished, Vel crossed his arms. So the cave is a failed facility. Not failed, Jackson said. Abandoned, maybe repurposed, but not dead. It's been preserving itself using biological systems. The mushrooms aren't wild, they're caretakers. Relin nodded. And the projections? A memory, Jackson said. A record of what it used to be. Maybe it's waiting for someone to finish what was started, or maybe it just wanted to be found. Months later, the cave was sealed not to hide it, but to protect it. The samples were archived, the enzymes synthesized. A new medical facility opened on the upper ridge, using the compound to treat nerve damage and cellular decay. Jackson declined further missions. He stayed on Virex 12 as a consultant, teaching xenobiology to the next wave of students. None of them ever called him lucky again.